podcast. It's me, your host, Tiffany, and here I'm talking to screenwriter, director, producer David Liban on his new feature film, Publish or Perish. Hi, David. How are you
Hi,
doing?
hi, Tiffany. Nice to talk to you.
Yes, I'm so glad to have you on. So, I was just telling David before we even started that I really enjoyed this film. It's very funny. It's very dark, so it's being described as a dark comedy, but to me, it was actually pretty funny. So, I had a really good time watching it. I did just kind of want to start off for people who don't know, if you kind of just give a little overview or description on what the film is about and maybe like where the idea came from.
Yeah, for sure. So the movie is about a professor who is coming up for tenure, and on the day that he's handing in his tenure dossier, he accidentally hits a student with his. He backs him over with his car, and so he has to decide whether or not he takes care of the kid or if does he first deliver his materials. And he makes a lot of bad decisions, and his life just goes spirals out of control from that one incident.
Yeah, yeah. Talk about spiraling. If you have seen the movie, then you know what I'm talking about already. So when did you know, as a writer, when you have these ideas, when do you know that this is going to be a film? Because I imagine that you have a ton of ideas, but how do you know that a specific idea is going to be the one that you're going to turn into a film?
I mean, you never know if it's actually going to get produced. That's the real big question. To write a screenplay can take months, and so, you have to like the process of writing, and we all have delusions of grandeur while we're making our work that, oh, this is the one that's going to hit big. But, me and every other screenwriter on the planet thinks that, so, um, that being said, I thought this was a pretty good idea. Like the premise of it was unusual. I don't think we had seen this kind of thing before. And I'm really drawn to dark comedy. And I myself am a professor. And so I have gone through tenure. And so while I was going through that process, these ideas came to me like what if scenarios. Basically, if you don't get tenure when you're a professor, you lose your job. And so like you are constantly like worrying like, oh my God, what am I going to do if I don't get this job? Is this the job I want? What about all, you worry about all your colleagues. And so it's a very stressful time. And I use that as like the starting point for writing this screenplay.
Right. And I was going to ask you about that. I'd read that you were in academics. So I was wondering if when you were writing the screenplay, was it sort of therapeutic for you?
Absolutely. I definitely excised many demons in writing this. I did I'm at the University of Colorado, Denver right now at the College of Arts and Media, and I'm the chairperson for the film department there. And where I work now is a wonderful place, and everybody's really nice. But I've been at other institutions where people are a little bit more contentious, and it wasn't going so well, and I was, so that's kind of based on some experiences and people that I've worked with in the past. So it's definitely inspired by people and events that have happened to me. But of course, I've never run over anybody, nor I hope to never hurt
Yeah, I
anybody.
hope not. And I imagine, I don't know if you're still teaching, but I would imagine that like your students would maybe like mess with you about this. Cause I know if you were my professor, I'd be like, oh my God, I hope he doesn't run me over.
Well, they haven't. Not many of them have seen it yet, but they will soon. A
Okay.
handful of them have seen it. I showed it to them in my screenwriting class.
Mhm.
But students, yeah, they're not shy when it comes to messing with their professors, and
Right.
I have a pretty lax relationship with most of them, and so they feel free to kind of poke fun, and I do the same. So,
Yeah. And how were you able to balance that being a professor and also being a filmmaker?
well, it's a good question because when I mean, as my job is a full-time job, but part of my responsibilities as a professor is that the way they break down your role is that 40% of your job is teaching, 40% is creative or research, and 20% is service to the college. So that 40% of creative research I use to make films and write
Mhm.
screenplays and that sort of thing. But when I got funded for the movie, when I met my partner, Jonathan Miller, he, we raised the money, so I was able to, take a leave of absence to actually shoot the movie. So that was, a godsend that I was able to, devote 100% of my attention to the movie because I don't know if you can't really make a feature film and do anything else really. It's like
Yeah.
completely encompassing.
Yeah, and then as I was saying earlier, so this film is being described as a dark comedy, and I find that I feel like that can be challenging when you're doing a film to try to implement comedy and drama, but still keep it to where maybe it's not too silly, but maybe it's not too dramatic. So how do you know when, one is maybe overtaking the other?
I mean, I went into it thinking, I mean, I like dark comedies, right?
Mhm.
And so it's a drama that has really absurdist moments in it, like the way our lead behaves is not acceptable, right? And so
Yeah.
it's so over the top that it's funny. And so, I mean, that's just who I am as a person. This makes me laugh. When I'm writing it, I thought this was funny. I am drawn to movies that, are dark comedies. Like I like Quentin Tarantino's films. I like the Coen brothers movies. All those movies are dark, not all of them, but those are dark comedies. And those are people that have succeeded in, having like terrible things happen while we're still laughing. Like I'm not comparing myself to Tarantino in any way, but if you look at a movie like Pulp Fiction, here we have these two hitmen and they're going about their day, and the things that they say and do are funny
Mhm.
until you see them actually murdering people. That's not as funny, but we've already been presented they've been presented in a way that we like them. We don't really know what their job is. We know they're kind of criminals, but we don't know what they are. And then when we see what they're doing, we're already invested in them as people. And so then it kind of opens the door for us to see them in a different way. And so that's kind of, where my mind went when I was, trying to develop these characters.
Yeah, and I feel like it's so interesting that, at least for me as a viewer, I feel like watching Jim, even though he's killed people, like you still like him. Like you're still kind of like rooting for him a little bit. You still want him to get tenure. You still want things to work out for them. How do you write that? How do you write that to where a character is killing people or doing bad things, but you're still making them likable?
So that's a good question because that is the plan, like so there, in screenwriting, there's this phrase from a book that somebody wrote called "Save the Cat," right? And so, in which you give the your protagonist or an anti-hero something about them that you find endearing, like saving a cat. In my situation, you see him loving his daughter. He's worrying, like she's putting in a nose ring, and he's like, "Oh my God, don't hurt you!" And he kisses her goodbye, and he clearly loves his daughter. And then he's got his lovely relationship with his wife, and they clearly love each other. And so you see this really nice side of him. And he gets propositioned by a student. He rejects it immediately, like it's not so like he seems to have certain degree of morals. So we like his behavior until we don't, And so like what's interesting though, I have a son who's 13. When I showed him the movie, and he asked the question, why do we like this guy who's doing all these terrible things, but we really don't like the dean, who really hasn't done anything wrong other than he's a jerk,
Hmm.
And so that's success in my mind as far as like, telling my story. That
Yeah.
was very gratifying to hear.
Yeah. And your son is only 13 and he recognized that.
Yes, yes,
Exactly. Yeah. And then so Timothy McCracken, am I saying his name right?
yes.
Who plays Jim in the film. I felt like he was such a perfect fit for this role. I just think he plays into the dry humor so well, and that was a big part of why it was so funny to me. How did that relationship come about? Did you know him prior to filming, or was this kind of just when you met him during casting?
So Tim and I am, first of all, I'm a huge fan of Timothy McCracken. Friendly word, it's Tim when you get to know him. His on screen is Timothy, but Tim is wildly talented and well trained, and just gives his all and really becomes the character. And so I worked with the way I met him is I am the chairman of the film department, and so I had hired him to teach acting several years ago. And so that's how I met him. And then my last feature film is called A Feral World. And so I had cast him to be a villain in that movie. And that was a much lower budget movie. And I still like the movie, and it's out in the world if people want to see it. But it's a much, more dark kind of show. It's not funny really. But I got to meet him, and he's really a lovely man and so versatile in what he can do. And so when I was writing this, I kind of imagined him in that role. He's about my age. And he understands academia because he's been a teacher and he is a teacher. And so, he's just, he really understood the motivations. Like we met for about, I don't know, months before we actually went to set. And, he had tons of questions, like he asked things that I hadn't really thought about. Like he really delved into the character. Why is he doing this? And then that would impact his delivery on things. And so he really went to the next level on this. He's terrific in this. He really nailed it.
Yeah, he did such a good job. He was so funny. So funny.
Agreed. Yes.
And so when you were writing this, was there any point that you thought, hey, maybe I could play this role?
I'm not an actor. That, I would say though that the voice of Jim is definitely the voice that lives inside my head.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I would never make the decisions that he did, but
Yeah.
the thoughts would cross my mind, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so I have no interest in being an actor. That's not my suit. I'm more of a writer director. That's what I feel best at. I don't like seeing myself on camera, and I'm not trained to be an actor. So I'll let the pros do that. I am in awe of actors, honestly, that know what they're doing. And Tim did this other thing, which I thought was really generous and also showed you how much of a professional he was, because, we would get a couple of different versions of it. And I say, okay, let's move on. Let's get the next setup. And then he'd say, David, can't we just try something a little bit different? And what he's telling me there is that he doesn't own a particular performance, right? He's telling me that I want to give you options because he understands the filmmaking process. So like, maybe I did this, but it might be funny if I did this. Mm-hmm. And that kind of freedom it's very freeing for a director when somebody, like, because I don't want to hurt his feelings or anyone's feelings when we're making the movies.
Yeah.
And so like when you give somebody an adjustment, you're like, could you do it like this? Or, you give them something that they can work with to try to adjust the performance. And by him doing that freed us up to like try different things, to the point where like he was so respectful and so fun to work with that the entire crew loved this guy. Right. And so when, we were like exhausted, 13 hours in, and Tim wanted to do another take, everybody's like, drop what they're doing, we'll do another take, because we loved Tim so much that we wanted him to give him that opportunity to do his craft.
Yeah, that was sort of my next question. I wanted to kind of know if there was any room for him to go off script, and if so, did any of that make it into the film?
I mean, there wasn't a lot of ad-libbing. It's pretty much the way the script is, aside from like maybe the words got jumbled in their mouth and they adjusted the sentences here and there. Or can I say it like this instead of like that? But the script is pretty much as it was written, more or less. And, some of the actions that I imagined in my head when I was writing, it didn't work when we got to the set. So like, we would, adjust things accordingly. But, they say that, when you write a screenplay, there's 3 phases of writing. You write the screenplay, that's the first draft. You shoot the film, that's the second draft, and then you edit the film, and that's the final draft. And so it changes throughout the whole process.
And so by, I guess, the final draft and you watching it, what did it turn out the way that you thought it was in your head?
Yeah, I mean, I've lived with it for so long, and my editor Justin Lewis, he did the lion's share of the edit, but I would be in there to kind of fine tune it, and so we worked together pretty closely. I would say yes. It's a lot like I imagined in my head, and even better. And that's because you can't really imagine how a performer is going to bring it to life. So like it's one thing in my head, but when I see the performers do it, I'm like, oh, that's good. Like I didn't, so that kind of, so in some ways it's better. In other ways, we had a very tight shooting schedule. So, I wish I had a little bit more time, but, I had a great DP and a production designer who really brought the whole thing together as far as the look of it. So, we planned it out really well. So it all kind of went as I imagined it mostly.
Yeah. And then with this film, do you feel like this is kind of, you're done with that? Or would you ever maybe do a part 2 or some type of continuation?
I've thought about that. I mean, given how, I'm not going to give away the ending, but given how it ends, it would have to follow a different character. And I do have some ideas on which characters I could possibly follow if we go down that route. But I mean, honestly, I've written another screenplay completely unrelated to this. So if things work out and I can, get that film finance, then I would like to do that one also. But I'm kind of open to a lot of different ideas at this point.
Okay, I would like to see that. And then for your audience, what do you want them to get out of this film?
I want them to be entertained, like that. I don't really make films to send a message to try to, you know, I like that there are movies out there that are about social justice and, things like that. But that's not what this movie is. This movie is purely entertainment, right?
Hmm.
So what I want people to walk away with is like they had a memorable, good laugh, and they were engaged in the characters, and it's a movie that they can talk about and try to piece together, because there's a lot of moving parts that kind of all come together really nicely. So that's kind of my main thing, is that I really hope that they laugh and gasp in all the right places.
Yeah. And then I've heard that this film has been played at a bunch of different festivals. So what's the next film festival this will be playing at?
So let's see. The next film festival is at the Studio City Film Festival in Studio City, California. And that happens on September 7th. And then after that, it's going to be at the Richmond International Film and Music Festival. So that's in Richmond, Virginia at the end of September. But it's coming to the end of the festival run. We were probably in about 15 film festivals overall, and so we did pretty well.
Yeah, that sounds really good. And
Yeah.
then when they're screening at film festivals, are you there watching it with the audience, or are you like looking to see how people reacting?
Yeah, there's only one festival where I couldn't be in the room because the venue was not, they screwed up the screening, the audio was terrible, the picture, I couldn't even be in the room with it. Aside from that, I love to be in the audience and watching the people to see, like, yeah, I know, oh, here comes the part, here comes the part.
Yeah, yeah.
So that is very fun for me, because that's, obviously I'm not watching the movie for entertainment's sake. I'm watching it to see what the audience is going to do.
Right, right. And then you mentioned that you were working on a completely different screenplay. So I wanted to ask you if you had any current projects that you're able to discuss or talk about with people.
I mean, I could tell you what, I know some people are really secretive about their ideas, but the screenplay's written and I'm hoping to get it made. But the screenplay is about a woman who's in her 20s who is cursed, and all the men that she has sex with die horrible deaths.
Oh,
So things are going bad for her, and she lost a boyfriend again, and so now she's trying to find a remedy to this situation. And along the way, she befriends a 13-year-old boy, and they have a friendship, kind of a road movie that it turns into, to try to find a remedy to this.
yeah, that you really do like dark stuff, huh?
I do.
That's really dark.
This one is actually funnier and less, believe it or not, less dark than Publish or Perish.
Oh, it is?
Oh yeah, I mean it's dark, but I mean, Publish or Perish goes to some naughty places.
Yeah, yeah. And then so for that one, if that gets made into a feature film, is that something that you want to be a part of film festivals as well?
Oh yeah. I mean, I would definitely want to get the movie out there and see it in audiences again, for sure.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, I'm going to wrap up this interview. I don't want to take too much of your time. But before I go, I did want to ask too, if you have any social media or a website or anything that you want to put out there for people to follow you and to keep up with your projects.
Yeah, for sure. So my personal account is called tinyfistfilms.com. And so that's where you can learn about my past work and things that I'm working on. But the movie Publish or Perish, you can follow that. That's publishorperish.movie. So that's where you can find information about this film and where to watch it and that kind of thing.
Okay, and it will be available to stream on August 18th, which is soon. That's a few days. So you guys go ahead and watch it. It's a really, really good film, really funny. I definitely laughed out loud with it. And thank you, David, for joining me. I appreciate your time.
Thank you so much. I appreciate talking to you.
Okay, I hope you have a good day.
You too.
Okay, bye-bye.